got to find a ladder. I've got to find a ladder. Yeah, that'll do. What stole the attention from last weekend's Grand Prix was the fact that the Ferrari relationship between Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc broke down in a very severe manner. They had a bit of a spot of argy-bargy right after the Grand Prix finished, after they duked it out on the racetrack, with Fred Vasseur immediately having to end any speculation that there was any sort of team orders at play or sort of a discord brewing up between them at a time when they really don't need it to happen, considering that Ferrari aren't exactly going after Red Bull, given that that team is effectively one driver down at the moment, with Sergio Perez far off the top four, and now McLaren are actually starting to catch them up due to the fact that both of their cars have finished every single Grand Prix. They both scored Piastri and Lando, and now through sheer consistency alone, Ferrari might lose second place in the Constructors when it's had the best chance to do so, or better yet, even go for the top tier of F1's team standings itself. And to top it all off, they had a problem with their car again, and it's a problem that they thought they had fixed with all of these upgrades that they had rushed in for the Circuit de Catalunya, which were originally planned to go to Silverstone, and it's high-speed bouncing again, the porpoising effect, that basically every single team has pretty much eliminated and will not be a problem at all with the brand new regulations in 2026, since ground effect will not be a thing. Not even Mercedes is having a problem with it anymore. And now because of it, it was very much reported that at the final corner of the circuit, there was a lot of high-speed bouncing, which certainly impacted their efficacy down the straights, and ultimately it led to them basically losing a lot of time, and Charles Leclerc being compromised in his run for a podium, and them just not being anywhere near Red Bull or McLaren, and Mercedes catching up to them. They were the slowest out of the top four teams, and sure, they're not as bad as some other teams, but these were the guys that were meant to be challenging Red Bull. And so far, for the last couple of races since Canada, they've just not really impressed after a really triumphant Monaco victory. What this goes to show is that if you bring upgrades, they might not always work, especially if you rush them. These were meant to come in for the British Grand Prix. But since we are now clearly in the middle of a development war, we are basically going to be having a situation where you are going to see teams rushing parts onto the car. We're seeing it with Red Bull. They're bringing upgrades where they probably wouldn't have brought them for another couple of races. And they're not working fully as intended. They are working just to keep them that little bit ahead or in the running with McLaren. It's getting really, really spicy. And on top of that, Carlos and Charles show a rare case of feuding after their combative phrasing after the end of the race, which resulted in Charles accusing Carlos of sensationalist driving to make him look good to other teams, and Carlos clapping back stating that Charles complains all the time after the race. But fortunately, we are seeing an era of Ferrari where they don't linger over that sort of thing. Fred Vasseur immediately came on the blower and told people basically just to stop speculating. They've only just got out of the car, tempers are high, let's move on, don't worry about it. And yeah, that was actually quite the right thing to do. I am now quite relieved by that, because I can imagine in the Binotto era, the Arriva Bene era, basically any era before last year, Ferrari would have probably gone to the media and gotten really angry about it and thought, this is not what we want, and then it would have just got even worse. Thankfully though, it's not. And here's hoping that now they've had some time to go over the data, that by the time we get to this weekend, and they'll now actually know a thing or two about these upgrades, and it going into a sprint weekend, there might be a chance for Ferrari to start to stabilize itself once again and get ready for when McLaren bring their upgrades, and then they might have to have a whole other battle themselves. And then of course there's Mercedes. There's a lot of things going on with the top four, but that's good for us. But one thing to consider here is something that either ruined or excited us in the period of Verstappen dominance: track limits. For months after last year's Austrian Grand Prix, no one was quite sure what was going to be happening, what was going to be done to address a situation where dozens of lap times were deleted, and we had absolutely no idea who was going to be getting pole position for the Grand Prix the following day, or whether or not people went out in Q2 or Q3, especially since it took minutes to get a response. You were just left on tenterhooks, and not in a good way. Track limits, they are exciting to a point. You know, when you start to get 50, 60, 70 lap times deleted, then it becomes annoying. And no one was quite sure what was going to be happening. Were the FIA going to bring AI into the debate and perhaps, well, get robots and computers to sort it out so we get an immediate feedback loop? Thankfully, what they're doing, them and the track organisers, is going analog with this one. and they are implementing classic gravel traps. Shallow ones, but ones that can easily be put in for the weekend and then brought out again. They're not going to stick around because that red and white stripe effect at turn 10, it just looks so beautiful. But this needs to be done because even Norris has said, this has just gotten ridiculous at this point. We cannot let this slide any longer. It should have been done years ago. But at the same time, though, Spielberg is known for being one of the fastest tracks in F1. Do they really want to lose that prestigious title just for the sake of track limits? Because it's not the track organizer's problem, it's the FIA's problem, and the cars for going over the line. But either way, it was turns 9 and 10 that were the main issue, but I think we had some issues at turn 4 and 6, so we still will see track limits, but nowhere near as bad as before. So I'm actually looking forward to this because I'm glad that we're seeing more gravel traps in Formula 1 again. It's very much old school, it's analog, and it's simple. If you go into the gravel, you're done. Meanwhile, we've had some more updates regarding the allegations about Mercedes and sabotage. Yeah, I think we should be adding sabotage to the 2024 Formula 1 lexicon alongside correlation, the buzzword that everybody keeps using. And now we've had a response from Mercedes reporting all of this to the police, and now they basically said nothing bad has happened, no crime has been committed. But they have been told Mercedes what to do should this persist. And I think now we should be really drawing a line over this, and the sabotage debate should be well and truly put to bed because it's gotten ridiculous at this point. And I think Toto's had enough of this. Last year, Mercedes would have been writing open letters of apology for the fact that Lewis didn't do so well and the team let him down, but not anymore. We've gotten to a point where Toto's basically just hurling angry words towards people that are doing this. Sorry, yeah, that's not Toto. That was well timed though. We are certainly not going to be seeing Toto talking about apologizing or anything. He's going to find ways to independently investigate and make sure this doesn't happen again. And quite frankly, this has gone far enough because why would Mercedes sabotage one of their own cars out of spite because Lewis Hamilton is leaving? Right now, Mercedes are in a really good position because both cars are doing really well. The W15 is looking good. They might actually be in the hunt for third place in the Constructors, like they were in 2022. And why would they therefore take out one of their own cars? It's just not exactly a good look. And if they want to get any top name drivers to replace Lewis Hamilton or George Russell for 2026, this is not a good word of confidence and will be going, hey, if you ever think about betraying us or leaving us, good luck trying to get our support. And no driver would actually be smart enough to go for them if that's going to happen, and Toto would be that vindictive. But seriously, Toto, if you're determined to go for Max in 2026, this cannot continue, and I'm glad you're actually taking an aggressive stance on this. Now, as for the rest of the grid, it's actually kind of hard to tell because, like I mentioned with Ferrari, upgrades are not guaranteed to make your car much better. We're seeing this with Racing Bulls, we're seeing this with Aston Martin. They started off in a really solid position, or their first batch of upgrades worked really well, and then suddenly things don't quite work out, with even Tsunoda and Ricciardo totally surprised that Racing Bulls' upgrades weren't working properly. And I think Racing Bulls did have some issues with their car as well that weren't helping or not maximizing the full potential of the upgrades. What this proves to me is that maybe Alpine might have pulled a 189 IQ maneuver by not bringing any upgrades at all, or at least not bringing any substantial upgrades other than weight saving. Weight saving seems to be the most reliable upgrade path. Just shave the car in terms of kilograms and you're good to go, and it's guaranteed to work. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Alpine might have had a point in not upgrading their car whatsoever, and now we've got a car that is possibly in contention for points on a regular basis because Alpine has scored in 3 races in a row. We might not see any updates to the A524 until after the summer break. We might get a major one, and then we might find out that they know exactly what it will do and how it will work because they're basically copying McLaren's script from last year, and we might see Alpine back as the 5th fastest car again. That's wild, and it's a roller coaster of events, and I guess maybe Flavio Briatore being there has been some sort of rallying call, because now with all of the statements that are coming out, we're not hearing from Faman anymore because he probably can't be trusted in terms of a statement, and now we're getting Briatore being the spokesperson. And it's certainly brought a lot of interest in terms of next year's lineup, because now Gasly's most likely to be going in for next year because they'll take up the option on him, and I think that Briatore might want to keep him since, consistency, continuity for at least one of your drivers, but it comes to a situation where who's going to be with him? And the reason why we had Carlos Sainz's decision to go to Williams being delayed, because everyone was talking about it for last weekend, was down to the fact that Briatore put in a last-minute bid for Carlos to go back to Alpine, where he went there as a Red Bull refugee. In fact, we'd actually end up with a lineup for 2025 consisting of both of them being Red Bull refugees, with both of them taking charge of their own destiny, which is interesting and compelling, and would be brilliant if it worked, and an in-your-face Christian Horner if they turned out to be competitive, because the Red Bull Junior team is pretty much dead at this point, because Liam Lawson, he might be going to Sauber at this rate, going to Audi. In fact, I want that to happen. Good on you, Liam. You should be going chasing for that one. But, yeah, there's also the talk about what's going on with Jack Doohan and Mick Schumacher. They're undertaking a private test next week at the Paul Ricard circuit, and they're going to be piloting the 2022 Alpine to determine who might be getting that second seat should Carlos decide not to take up the offer. And I seriously doubt that Carlos would take up that offer, but it did throw a curveball. It was very interesting, and a justifiable reason why this is dragging on for even longer. It's a really tough one, actually, because I didn't realise that Flavio Briatore was Jack Doohan's manager. That will certainly be a leg up for the young guy, but he didn't really get a chance to shine in the FP1 test he did in Montreal because it basically got washed out. And Mick Schumacher has shown promise in the World Endurance department of Alpine when the Mechachrome engine didn't, but I think what might swing it in the favour of Mick is down to the possible solution regarding the power unit problem, since there are loads of rumours going about that Alpine is investigating the possibility of becoming a customer team with Mercedes, taking up the fourth team role that Aston Martin had. I don't know the full extent of what the relationship will be, whether it will just be a simple customers deal, a technical partnership, a seat at the table arrangement that McLaren has, we don't know. But one thing that might make it possibly viable and cheaper is a sweetener package, and Alpine/Renault are not afraid of doing this because that's how they got Carlos Sainz, as a sweetener package for Red Bull to ditch their power units for Toro Rosso, so that means they could begin the experiment with Honda, which turned out to be fabulous in the long term. And I bet they might do the same thing with Mercedes, because as we've been talking about, the power units of Mercedes are looking really spicy, and Alpine might be able to make the most of that. And better yet, get a guy who knows the Mercedes engine through and through, Mick Schumacher, who's worked well with them. They know exactly what he can do. It might mean that Toto might be going, you know what, you're bringing in Mick, we'll make sure that we can give you a cut price deal, like a 2-finger discount or something. And that's not exactly a bad shout. In the short term though, I don't really see them going for points this weekend, because you need an agile and fast car with all of those high-speed corners, and the A524, that ain't it. Anyway, let's go to the predictions and pick maybe a different location, because I don't know, man, this isn't the same. Now, considering that I've not really been talking much about McLaren, aside from them not bringing upgrades to the Spanish Grand Prix, aside from little bits and pieces, I think that Lando is the odds-on favourite to win the Austrian Grand Prix, because put simply, the Spielberg Red Bull Ring is one of his beast tracks, like Imola, where he is expected to do well. And given the fact that the MCL38 is now level pegging with the RB20, if not slightly better, because of the deficit it was managing to pull back during the race, I do think that if Lando can just get track position and hold it, he will be able to dictate the pace of the race quite convincingly, and therefore be able to ensure that Max Verstappen can't get away or be able to dictate the pace of the race himself. I just feel like he's motivated. He knows that he can do it. He can go for wins, and the team are right behind him. But the problem is, though, is that there are lots of things going against him, in the sense that he does need to improve his starts. The team also need to be more bold when it comes to strategy, and also not wait too long, because there are a couple of instances where they just simply waited a little bit too long, they didn't make the most of the undercut, or, like in Canada, they just went out a little bit too late and the tyres were just too cold and he lost the win because of it. There are just lots of little things that just stop McLaren from really excelling, but they'll get there. But I think they might just be able to edge it thanks to Lando's experience with the Red Bull Ring. And speaking of Red Bull, I do feel like Verstappen will be right behind him. It will be within 5 seconds. I don't expect Max Verstappen to not perform at the home circuit of Red Bull, because he'll be motivated as well, and he'll also be qualifying very, very high. I think Red Bull will be taking qualifying far more seriously, like they sort of have done in recent years, but even more so. They need to get pole position to have any chance, or get a better start and make the most of the fact that Lando, that's one of his weaknesses, put simply. And also, I think Red Bull might capitalize on the fact that McLaren and Lando are just so desperate to beat them. They've just become obsessed with doing so, and that might be to their advantage, that they will just get blinded, the red mist will descend upon them, and then Max will just calmly do his thing, get the car optimized, they'll work on their own upgrades, and yeah, I think the only thing we need to think about are the curbs issue, because Verstappen's been testing the RB18, the 2022 car, trying to figure out what went wrong and what they can learn from it. So it's clear that the domination period has gone from Red Bull. Even Verstappen admits it, but I don't see them falling back hard. They won't. Max will be the key differentiator from that happening and them still being able to win anyway. And that's what's going to make it interesting. And as a result, I feel like Charles Leclerc in third place will be a very distant third. I don't think that Ferrari are really going to be figuring anywhere near McLaren and Red Bull at the moment, but I feel like they will be able to get a better understanding when it comes to the overall concept of what they're working with their upgrades, because they'll have had some time to think, they'll have gone back to the drawing board, and ultimately, they'll be right back up there. They might be able to leapfrog past back through Mercedes again, but it might still be close, because the Mercedes race pace is solid, and Hamilton, at the end of a race, is absolutely dynamite, and that might be enough to give Charles Leclerc pause for thought. And also, Ferrari just need to be slightly better with their strategy, because the drivers are starting to get antsy, they're starting to get tense, and Ferrari just can't simply fall back on the issues that they've been having over the last few years. Thankfully, I think the Sir will start to put an end to that, but it's going to be growing pains, that's for sure. And they also need to get over the idea of Enrico Cardile, their technical director, leaving for Aston Martin for a better deal, and that was probably a major blow, because the SF24 is a really solid car and it is improving, and they're going to be having to go back through the drawing board again. Whether or not it's with Adrian Newey or someone else, it remains to be seen. But right now, this is a major loss for Ferrari, them about to become a super team. And sure, Newey might be the thing that might help for them to kick on even more, but right now, it's not quite as clear as it was before, even a week ago. And equally, Hamilton will be buoyed by the podium from Spain, as well as his sprint podium in China, that things are starting to come back his way, and that the W15 is indeed a car that can bring back the goods. Whether or not it's going to be as good as what Ferrari can pull over the course of the season remains to be seen. It's very much up in the air, but at least we can actually talk about Mercedes being somewhat challengers for third place in the Constructors. We could not be saying that a month ago. Things are working in their favour, and we see James Allison having turned a corner with the car, and some of the weaknesses, including cooling, are not as much of a factor anymore, which means that we definitely have 4 teams in the mix, and Mercedes has actually improved over Ferrari. I don't think that we're going to be seeing top 4 teams going for victories, but the top 4 teams are definitely going to be contending for the top points. I feel like now at the moment it's Red Bull and McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari. Kind of like what we had last year for second place in the Constructors. Ferrari just got past Mercedes, barely. Mercedes just held on to second place, and now I feel like it's now the battle for third. And this is going to make things very interesting, and Hamilton will be very fired up. I feel like all of the issues that he's been having has suddenly started to wash away. He feels fired up, and a fired up Lewis, this will be a good way to go. And especially, the move to the grid at the moment will be sideways when him goes to Ferrari, and therefore it might mean less of a shock in terms of it being much better than expected or far worse. Still, it's quite vague, but I think Hamilton's odds on for 4th. 5th place, Carlos. And I feel like Ferrari will be getting over the issues they had with their drivers, because they have to. Because otherwise, they are either going to lose out on a chance for the Constructors, because Sergio Perez is nowhere. I don't know where he's going to be in the top 10. It really depends on qualifying. And also, I just feel like the discord between the drivers that had held steady for the last couple of years is starting to get a bit fractious, because Charles can sense wins, Carlos needs to find a team. There are lots of motivators to make sure that they have a really good race, and I think Vassar's had a word with them. They'll have understood things about the car, but I feel like Mercedes are their greatest challenges at the moment. McLaren and Ferrari, McLaren and Red Bull, they're up the road, so they're going to be really having a situation where we get Ferrari, Mercedes, or vice versa for the next few races, because Ferrari decided to rush out their Silverstone upgrades, and now they've got nothing in terms of a major upgrade for another few races yet, maybe not until Hungary. And as for Mercedes, they're bringing it bit by bit, and that's just going to leave a bigger mystery. But right now, I feel like Carlos will be just ahead of George. But really, I don't know about George either, because in Canada, he had the chance to win, but he didn't take it, and then in Spain, he was electric. He was amazing. So right now, I don't know what I can think. Maybe he might qualify well and he might fall back. That, again, remains to be seen. And that might be something I'm repeating a lot, but I'm glad that I can say it, because 2024, it's not predictable anymore. And right now, I'm going to predict that you might like this video over here. So if I'm right, go and click on it, and I'll see you over there, back in the loft in the ladder. Familiar territory. Oh, this is not the same.